Welcome into Golf Central. I'm Whit Watson. PGA Tour COO Ron Price and board member Jimmy Dunn were under the microscope today in D.C. Some of the key players at the hearings: the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which is chaired by Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut. The ranking member is Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin. And the two witnesses, as mentioned, Price and Dunn. Price with more on why the PGA Tour agreed to the partnership with the PIF.
We believe we've done everything we could possibly do to defend what we stand for, including spending tens of millions of dollars to defend litigation instigated by LIV Golf. And that's significant funds that were diverted away from our core mission to benefit our players and charity. As part of the litigation, we were successful in securing a court ruling that the Public Investment Fund was not protected under sovereign immunity with respect to litigation discovery and potentially liability. That's something which had never been done before in the United States. Meanwhile, we've seen continued strength of the tour, thanks to the loyalty, talent, and performance of the remarkable players we are proud to call members of the PGA Tour.
One of the key questions from Senator Blumenthal, the financial commitment on both sides. How much money are the Saudis willing to invest in this new entity?
Senator, we have not taken any funding. All we've done is settle the litigation and enter into a framework agreement in which the PGA Tour will be the clear leader of professional golf going
But there
forward.
is an understanding that PIF will contribute an investment to the PGA Tour and the entity that will control it.
They will not be contributing to the PGA Tour. It will be a PGA Tour control subsidiary, and any funding
What is the amount of the Saudi investment that is going to be made?
that has not been determined yet, Senator.
Has there been any discussion of what that amount will be?
It would be. There's been discussions. It would be a significant amount, north of.
What are the amounts that have been discussed?
North of $1 billion.
A key point repeated by policy board member Jimmy Dunn. This is a framework, an agreement to agree. Everything is still negotiable. Everything is on the table, and it's far from a done deal.
We have no agreement. We have agreement to possibly get to an agreement. So I think the way it was announced, which was really bad, okay, everybody jumped to a conclusion, maybe even this body, that, they're selling to the, we're not, but we are really trying to figure out the right thing to do for our players and the global game of golf. And by the way, we'll try hard to get an agreement, and I'm hopeful that we will. If we don't, we'll have to go through some other. We'll have to accept that we're going to have to go back and compete, and we'll have to do it, and we'll do it.
Another key talking point: who controls this new business? Though the PIF is making potentially a significant investment, both Dunn and Price emphasize the fact that the PGA Tour will make the key decisions.
I think the PGA Tour definitely stays intact and becomes more powerful. And I hope that in a more constructive way, Yasser gets a more productive role in the game of golf, because I think the PGA Tour product is vastly superior. That's my opinion.
Rich Lerner is in D.C. this week, was in the room, as a matter of fact, on Tuesday following this story. Rich, we'll send it to you.
But I, too, like Eamon, was struck by the difference in tone and approach. Senators Blumenthal and Johnson. Senator Johnson, the Republican from Wisconsin, largely providing cover for the PGA Tour. On the other hand, Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut admonished the PGA Tour at various points in the presentation this afternoon, using extremely strong language like lack of values, betrayal, and I thought the one that really stuck out, surrender. Money, he said, is the reason you surrendered. When the hearings were over, Senator Blumenthal came up, sat beside me. I had a chance to talk to him, and he's suggesting that the PGA Tour does now have other options.
The litigation is behind them. It's history. It's done. And they ought to be exploring options that involve less repressive regimes no sports washing, other financial options. And let's be very clear. They were winning the litigation. They conceded. They were winning. They were on top. And they're saying, oh, well, that improved our bargaining position. But the concession of financial control and, in effect, equity ownership, I think, puts them in jeopardy of very severe consequences to the sport.
What are specifically some of the potential national security risks with Saudi involvement in, as you say, an American cultural treasure?
Sports are central to our culture and society. Athletes are role models, and they are ambassadors abroad of our values. The tour has powerful financial and economic implications for communities like Connecticut, where the Travelers is played, $3 million to local charities, $60 million to our economy. Let's say they decide to cut in half the number of tournaments in the United States. Go international. They can make more money. If it's all about the money, it's less about the values.
Now, Senator Johnson, on the other hand, was much more sympathetic to the PGA Tour's plight, saying they essentially had no choice. The PGA Tour's general thrust here is that if it's a financial arms race, they're going to lose. The Saudi Public Investment Fund is crawling closer to $750 billion. The net revenues for the PGA Tour are a little bit north of $1 billion. It's just not a fair fight. Senator Johnson adding that he didn't even want this hearing to begin with.
They're in the midst of a negotiation. I've done a lot of negotiating in life. That happens privately. You know, trying to negotiate in public is not a very easy thing to do. So I'd like to give the tour and the parties the space to try and work this thing out for the betterment of golf. But all that being said, you know, I understand that there's a great deal of interest in the hearing. I've got a great deal of interest in the subject. And I think, in the end, I think the hearing was helpful. I think it was constructive. It allowed the PGA to lay out and describe the challenges it faces just running the league, much less the added challenge of the existential threat that the Saudi PIF represented to golf.
You don't think there's any sort of national security threat? Is that
No.
Why,
Listen,
why is that?
Well, I understand the sports washing issue. I've got the deepest sympathy for the 9/11 families. Let's face it, Jimmy Dunn is part of that 9/11 community. There's no doubt about that. I mean, this was not an easy thing for him to reach out. So he has no qualms about dealing with the individuals he's dealing with in the Saudi side. And I would say, too, it's, you know, as Americans, we need to stop looking at the world in such black and white terms. There's a lot of gray. There's a reality that you have to deal with. For example, Saudi Arabia, the largest oil producer in the world. You know, we all use oil. If you want to, you know, put all the burden on the PGA, it's not fair. You know, put the burden on them to hold Saudi Arabia accountable. We have to recognize the fact that we all use oil. We're the ones that are filling up that public investment fund of Saudi Arabia, that they have all this money to spend. And they declared their intention to be involved in golf, and that's what the PGA was dealt with.
Senator Johnson said to me, it's reality versus demagoguery. Whit, these days you need a law degree from Harvard, an MBA from Stanford, and a degree in international relations from Georgetown here in Washington, D.C., just to keep up with what's happening in our sport.